All right, welcome everybody to week 15 of the Age of Discovery. The semester has gone by so fast. I can't believe this is the penultimate class of the semester. We'll have one more class next week, which will be week 16, and then we'll be off for Christmas. Is that right? No. Am I wrong? I might be wrong. No, we have two classes left, right? This is week 14. We have week 15 and a week 16. Yes. So we have two classes left after today. Sorry. I'll double check that and make sure that I get it right. But we have two classes left. Sorry, this is not the second to last. Next week is. I've done the reading. I just finished reading ahead again for next week, so I think my mind might just be already on next week's topic. So I apologize if some of my thoughts today are on things that you're going to read this week. Apparently, that's what's on my mind a little bit. But I'm so excited to talk about Magellan. I think it's interesting, and some of you have done this. It sounds like in the comments you left in Mighty Networks, just now that we've run into and learned about more explorers, explorers that really did a lot of amazing things, we have people to compare him to, and so we can kind of compare his greatness compared to the others, as well as some of his faults. Just the things that the explorers, the captains of these ships were up against. Learning what Magellan was put through kind of gives me a little bit more appreciation for what Columbus went through. Um, and just comparing how Magellan handled things versus how Columbus did, and sort of finding that balance. It's just interesting to have such similar people yet pretty different also at the same time. So we'll get into that a little bit more. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Maybe. I usually operate on a setup where I have three monitors, and right now I just have my laptop and one monitor. So things look a little bit different on my screen to me. Hopefully they're not different to you other than my camera angle. It's not the greatest. All right, is my screen sharing? Excellent. Let me move some things around. I don't have as much real estate on my desktop here. All right, cool. All right, so for today, we will be talking about some of my thoughts, some questions that I have for you guys, sort of my version of thoughtful discussion questions, things that I've been thinking about as I've read this and thought about Magellan and just some of the interesting storylines that happened with Magellan, with his history of growing up as for the Portuguese in Portugal, sailing for the Portuguese crown, going to war for them, and then sort of how that takes a turn when they think he's crazy and they don't want to give him money to go around the southern end of South America or try and find a western route, and how that changes things in his journey and in history. Anyway, so I have some questions about that and about his leadership styles, how we can compare him to Columbus. We'll talk about, according to our research, things that you guys found as you were digging in a little deeper, and then a few of our favorite things. Next week, we'll continue reading in Over the Edge of the World. We'll read chapters 6 through 9. And then in chapter 10, I think I've got it here. Yeah. So in chapter 10, I'll only have you read the second half of that chapter. Uh, I mean, time wise, as far as like kind of pacing ourselves through with the amount of time of homework I give, it should have probably ended at chapter 9. I wanted to get to the final battle where we learn how Magellan's life ends. I guess it's probably not a spoiler because a lot of you have already done in your, according to research, you found out that one ship gets back and only 18 sailors of the 260 something that started make it back home. Magellan is not one of them. Spoiler alert. And so I wanted to read the second half of that chapter so it gives the details leading up to what he was doing, why he was doing it. I'll let you find out the details for yourself, and see if you agree with his choices that put him in this precarious situation. Um, which I'll be curious to see what you think, if it was a smart decision or not. I mean, knowing the outcome, hindsight 2020, we probably would say it's not, but I'll be curious to see what you think. So anyway, long story shorter, chapter 6 through 9, and then the second half of chapter 10. So you'll start on page, in my book, it's 269. It's my understanding that some of the prints, the printing versions of the book, I guess like when I sent out the pages to skip, some of the pages were off in some of the different printing versions of the book. So I included a picture so that you can find it here. So when you get to chapter 10, just jump ahead to um, this page. And on the page before it, it ends with something like Mactan was a hamlet that was on a nearby island or something like that. And then it has a star, and then the next page starts here. In the Audible version, if you're watching on Audible, and I'll post this too in the homework, but in chapter 10, just start at minute 15 seconds, 15:12. So 15 minutes, 12 seconds. Just skip the first half of that. All right, so that will be the reading for next week, chapter 6 through 9, and then the second half of chapter 10. And then the supplemental content will be finishing Magellan's story. Next week, when we come back, I will summarize what happens after what we read here. And then in our final week, we'll do sort of a review, and then we'll have a lot of about half of that will be Sir Francis Drake, sort of ending the age of exploration and starting more of a age of colonization and those things. And so that will take us through the rest of the course. So Magellan for one more week. After that, Francis Drake and a review of everything we've talked about. Daniel, go ahead.
If Columbus, who was working for Spain, found the Americas, then why did the British start America or get that part of America?
That's a good question. What do you think? Or does anybody else have thoughts on it
The
before I
British
answer
fought
mine?
Spain and crushed them.
Maybe. Braden, go ahead.
I'm not completely sure, but I remember hearing somewhere that they didn't think that that was actually part of America, the British colonized it first, until like they sailed ships and found that it did connect to the rest of everywhere that Spain and Portugal had found. And then they realized that was like really, really, really big. And so then when Great Britain took the top pot, they're like, well, nobody's over here except for like the Indians, but they don't matter. So we could just take as much as we want. And same with France. So yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then how did the French get past the British and get on the other side,
So
making it so that the French and Indian War happened, which sparked the Revolutionary War and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think, how about I'll make a deal with you. In the last week of our class, I'll have the supplemental content be on that stuff. I mean, that is sort of what I had in mind because Sir Francis Drake is British and he was sailing and he was a pirate, but also doing some exploring of his own. And it goes into because I think England and France were probably pretty upset or disappointed. I don't know, angry. Who knows what emotions exactly, but how fair is it that the Pope is dividing up the world to Portugal and Spain? Right. And so I think at some point, England and France just said, well, we don't care. We want to go we want to get some of that land for ourselves too. And so England founded some colonies along the eastern coast of what's now the United States, and France went up north and went into Quebec and um, into Canada. Right. So I think that they probably just didn't care as much that the Pope had already divided up that land to Portugal and Spain based on the longitudinal lines that we talked about, like the Treaty of Tordesillas. And so I'll have some supplemental content on that. I think that that's interesting. We can go
But
into that some more.
I thought that the British and the French didn't go under the Pope. I mean, sure, they believed in Christianity, some of them, but a lot of France and England just were like, nah, I'm not into Christianity. At least that's
Yeah.
what the book tells me.
Yep. You're right. That is definitely a big part of it too. That they just who's how why is he the guy that should be dividing up the world? We're gonna go and find some of our own settlements. I mean, no one's over there to stop us, right? So and it ends up becoming an issue because as Spain starts settling in Florida, they start moving north and run into that, and so there are a lot of the um, settlements that happen along the east coast of the United States become forts, not only because they're worried about pirates and things, but they also they're worried about Spain or Portugal, and Spain is also worried about England coming down and taking it. So it's sort of the whole wild, wild west, right? Everybody's out there just trying to claim some more land, and they're so far away, it's hard to like share the news. And I mean, it's just such an interesting part that comes after the age of discovery, because then you start colonizing, and then everyone's fighting over who has what land and selling it. And truly, I mean, the right answer is it belongs to the people that lived there before they even arrived. So,
Right.
um,
You
yeah.
know, to me, it feels like France, England, and Spain suddenly turn out to be the three big powers when the revolution starts warming up,
Mhm.
and Portugal is shunned aside again.
Yeah, yeah. Portugal put all of its eggs in one basket that didn't end up working out for them in the long run, because they were the first ones to get to India, right? We learned that when we were talking about Vasco da Gama, and they held on to that land for a long time. They were running the spice trade for a long time, but when there are I think three leaders after Vasco da Gama that were very similar to Vasco da Gama, and they kept things running the way that they were supposed to or were designed to for Portugal. But then once you started getting some corrupt guys involved that were more about the money for themselves, less about preserving things for the crown, um, and then the Portuguese settlements in India started to falter, and then the Spice Islands started to falter, and eventually they were sort of kicked out of the area because they just weren't strong enough. Portugal did not have enough people to keep settling, to keep defending, to keep putting men in these forts to defend their spice trade areas. And so eventually they're kicked out, but because they had put all of their effort and energy into going to India, bringing back spices. It brought so much money to their country, but that took them out of the running for anything that happened in North or South America, right? Because all of their energy was going around Cape of Good Hope, making a ton of money on all of the spices, and they didn't care. Had they funded Christopher Columbus, had they funded Magellan, I don't know. We could be speaking Portuguese or Spanish in this class, right? Like it could have gone a very different way, had the Portuguese money been behind Columbus or Magellan. I think that the world has turned out the way it was supposed to. I think that Columbus was the one that was supposed to find North America. I think it needed to be a land for that would tolerate religious freedom. That wouldn't have happened under Spain or Portugal. Um, and so I think that everything sort of lined up so that America could become America. And I think
Yes.
that these men played a huge role in making that happen, especially Columbus. And I don't know. So I mean, it's interesting how things work out, and I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, Daniel. I appreciate you bringing it up, but I think the reason why they weren't in it is because things were going really well for them, and they didn't think they needed to start heading west until it was probably too late. And at that point, they didn't have any more power, any more men to send to try and
No
settle
more
North America.
allies. And no
Right?
more
That
allies.
too.
They were
That
busy
too.
fighting France or
Yeah.
England, Spain.
Absolutely. And
Um,
and this I mean these things that you're thinking of and the things we're talking about are why I've found the Age of Discovery so fascinating. Just the way everything shook out. There was so much unknown, right? I mean, that's they had to go and discover it. It was undiscovered until these guys were doing it. And I think that's why it's so fascinating is you can look back and see how it turned out and what one thing could have changed like in this book that we're talking about with Magellan, what if Portugal gave him the money to do it? Like it could be so different. He ran into places that had not yet been discovered, right? And they could have, the Portugal could have been like covered the whole world, covered the whole globe with the different places. And how would that have turned out? Who knows? They didn't have enough men there. It is a teeny country like I was looking at, I know a lot of you are familiar with Utah, but Portugal fits inside of Utah 3 times. And so I can drive from the north of Portugal to the south of Portugal in the time it would take you guys to drive to St. George. And so like it's just a different place. And so if you think about a country that 1/3 of the size of Utah that's going to try and take over the whole world, they spread themselves too thin if they were trying to do that. But the Age of Discovery is fascinating because it just one brave person that finds a new route, finds a new way, changes history forever just because of their bravery and their single event. I mean, Christopher Columbus feeling inspired to cross the Atlantic. Look what changed because he had that inspiration and felt called to go and do that, right? Magellan, who felt this calling and thought, okay, we've got to figure this out. We can figure it out. And he does. And his doesn't change history as much, but it definitely shapes the whole future. We now understand what the globe is and how the globe, like the true size of it and things. And it's just one person can do so much. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
I have just two more questions. One,
Okay.
I know the British, the American, and the French is kind of army coats, if you will. The British has blood red, the Americans have white, blue, and red, or at least in the 17 or 16,000s. And and I don't know what the Spanish or the Portuguese have. Does the Portuguese have purple?
I would guess red. I'll give you that homework though. I don't think
Yeah.
at this time I don't think that they had colors. I think they just had armor. Uh, like with Magellan and Columbus and those guys, I think what set them apart is that they were wearing armor and the natives that they were encountering did not wear armor. And in fact, the author goes out of his way to talk about how little clothing they were wearing most of the time. So um, yeah, I don't know if they had that colors. I don't know if that really came started until later on when the warfare sort of changed,
Right.
when they would just sort of stand in a line and face each other and see who could stay standing the longest, and that was the way you could differentiate yourself from someone else on the battlefield. I think at this point the battles were still like a few hundred people against a few hundred people, just sort of skirmishes, but. I'd be curious to find out when true like standardized uniforms took started. That's interesting thought.
I was thinking, well, if France is kind of more white and England is more red, then I'm thinking, oh, Portugal must be purple and Spain is yellow.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are colors from their flags. I mean, not purple in Portugal, but they definitely have red and green and some gold. So I'll look into that. That's interesting. Um,
And the Hessians have green, so that's all really
yeah.
the suits I remember.
Yeah, I'm curious. We'll have to find out when standardized uniforms came into play. It could have been around this time. I don't think that these guys were too concerned about uniforms when they were fighting, but at least at this point, we'll see. That'll be interesting to think about. I want to ask you guys some questions. Daniel's gotten a few questions out of the way. Thank you, Daniel. I want to ask you guys. So now that we've read a little bit more about the leadership, we've read about different explorers, we've read about how they've handled their crews, how they've handled the people that they encounter. Um, I mean, just in this leadership in the age of exploration. Now that we have a better knowledge base of what different leadership styles looked like back then. Early in the voyage, Magellan struggles to earn the trust of his mixed crew, which is mixed for a whole bunch of reasons, but there's just people from all over the place speaking different languages, coming from different cultures. And many of them, at least, especially the Spanish sailors, doubt their Portuguese captain. They think that he is sailing not for Spain. They think that he has other motives. Um, and as I mentioned, we've learned a lot about other explorers. So based on what you know, which of Magellan's leadership choices do you think were effective for his expedition, and which choices seemed risky or maybe were a bad choice? As you've seen how other people did it, what was something Magellan did that was exceptional, or what was something that he did that probably he would should regret or should have done differently? What do you guys think?
I think he was relatively good at putting down small mutinies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that he was very good at putting down mutinies when he knew about them. He was pretty ruthless with that, right? So as far as putting down a mutiny goes, yeah, I would be afraid of him. I would be afraid to go against him if he were my captain. Was that a good thing, though? I mean, it was good to keep control of the ships, but was it a good thing in the long run? I think that could be a strength and possibly a weakness. David, go ahead.
I feel like it was a strength in the sense that's like it's my way or no way, and he could like command the men and they'd be scared. But then again, I think he wasn't like super thoughtful towards some of the men, like when they weren't doing anything wrong, like when they were just doing their job. I don't think he was the nicest, but that also helped when they were kind of like rebellious.
Yeah. And I noticed that in your a few of I think in one of your comments that you posted on there, you compared him to Columbus. How does he compare to Columbus in this regard, as far as the treatment of his people and men?
I think he was similar in the way that he was firm like Columbus, but I feel like Columbus was a little bit more like he could compromise with the men. But I feel like Magellan was more just like, it's my way or you're gonna die.
Yeah. And I think that I mean we see from both stories that in some instances it's better to be have a firm hand. In other instances, it's better to be more Christ-like, right? To be more forgiving, to be uh, just I don't know, to see past it. So I think that that can be a strength in some respects because you definitely need control over your ships and your fleet. But at the same time, I mean, there needs to be some give and take, some um, as Daniel said, to be more thoughtful towards the men, right? So how do you think how does this reflect the challenges that the explorers face based on these character traits? How do these things reflect challenges that explorers faced when they were commanding these diverse crews? Would you want to be a captain? David shook his head. What do you guys think? Would you, I mean, in my mind, if I were a sailor and if I could go back in time, I don't know if sailing would be my thing. I think I'm more of a land lover. But I think that ultimately like you want to rise up, right? Right? You want to have the skills. You want to have the trust of the king. You want to have all of those things so that you can command these ships, but it feels like it would be so difficult to be put in all of the situations that these guys were put in, not just leading men that were diverse from diverse crews, but guys that I get the feeling these sailors were just not great people, right? I mean, it just seems like they were very flawed, and it would be so hard to lead them, to be a person that is inspired, that's trying to be like do the best that you can in God's eyes, and then have all of this stuff going on and trying to deal with it. It'd be so hard. Um, I used to think that it would be so awesome to be a king too, until I started doing research in royalty on royalty in Scotland, and just like the lives that they had to lead in order to be the king. It just was like, oh, I don't know if I'd want that. Like it just, so as I've learned more about what these guys were the situations they were put into, I think it'd be a difficult job to have. So David shook his head. Daniel, would you be interested in being a captain even though you'd run into situations like this?
As long as I would be able to learn navigation in about 3 years, definitely.
All right. Captain Daniel. He'd
But I
go
think
be our
sorry, but I would more rather be a rigging monk. But I could be if you wanted.
All right. Well, you'll learn the ropes, literally and figuratively, right? And then work your way up to being a captain. That'd be cool. All right. Next question. The author, so this is sort of the background that I provide to lead into the question. The author shows how Magellan's goals are tied to personal glory and a fierce competition between Spain and Portugal. How did these ambitions shape the expedition's early decisions? So in chapters 1 through 5, we go from trying to get like fighting for Portugal, trying to get Portuguese money, doesn't happen. Goes to Spain, gets the money, and then he sails and he's in Brazil or maybe Chile by now. And how does this race, I guess, or the rivalry between Spain and Portugal play into some of the decisions that Magellan made along these first few chapters of his story?
Well, personally, I think that a lot of his decisions, Portugal had taken a very early and very strong lead, and Spain, being the bully of that time, was like, hey, this should be my job. And so they're trying to catch up, and then Magellan comes along and he's like, I can go around the whole world and find new places for you. I mean, what did Spain have to lose but just a few money and a ships and some lives? I mean,
Hmm.
at least it wasn't their whole navy.
Right. Yeah, so that definitely motivated Spain to put some financial backing behind Magellan's ship to a crew to join him to send these 5 ships off. What about with Magellan's decisions? So he leaves Portugal, renounces his citizenship from Portugal, no longer Portuguese, I'm going to be Spanish. And so his name is not for now de Magalhães. It is now Ferdinand Magellan. I don't even know. I should have practiced that. But so now he's Spanish and he gets these 5 ships. He takes off and they go down to Cape Verde or the Canary Islands, and he receives a letter saying the King of Portugal is sending a fleet after you. He's mad that you're sailing for Spain, which is funny because, I mean, if he was so mad, why didn't he just give him money in the first place? But he's mad. He's sending a fleet to come after you and kill you. Um, watch out. And so, what did Magellan do in response to that letter? Do you guys remember? He packed up early. They were planning on being there longer, getting more supplies, preparing everything for the voyage across the Atlantic, and he left early. And not
He
only did
ran.
he leave early, but he took a different route. He took a route that none of the other sailors were expecting to go, and he didn't tell anybody why. And so he was wanting to keep everything a secret because he wanted to protect his crew, his fleet. He didn't want word to get out. I mean, if he was told people, all right, we're going to leave in a few days, we're going to go the southern route, maybe they would tell someone who would then tell someone who would then tell the Portuguese where he was going, right? And so he's keeping all of these things a secret, uh, but that causes issues with the other captains because were they happy that he was keeping secrets? I mean, that was a big part of the mutiny, right? That they were just like, what is this guy doing? He's sailing for Portugal. He's going to kill us. He doesn't know what he's doing. We're taking a route that we had never talked about doing. And it just started to lead to this discontent. Um, and
Kind
so I,
of, sorry,
sorry, no, go ahead.
kind of halfly like the Revolutionary War. They didn't know why Washington kept retreating. They were like, "Are we sure we picked the right man for the job?" So,
Yeah.
and his
Yeah.
they didn't mutiny, but they were like, "I can't wait till my shift is over."
Yeah.
And Washington had to pay them more and tell them and renew their patriotism. Yeah.
Yeah. They had to see the light again, right? They had to see something that would change their opinions. And that eventually does happen for Magellan. I think eventually they start seeing, okay, I get it. But that this was after like the third mutiny, after a ship sails home. I don't know if we've gotten to that part yet. Um, sorry, because I am getting them mixed up a little bit. But yeah, eventually they start seeing, oh yeah, I think Magellan probably was the right guy. I think he did know what he was doing. Um, I mean, it turns out he was pretty honorable in the long run, even though the whole time it's questioned, even though, um, yeah, I'll stop there. We can talk about the rest of that part next week after you read it. But it's interesting how history has been a roller coaster for people like Magellan and Columbus and Vasco da Gama. Just um, I think in the end, it's good to celebrate what they did for all of us.
Right.
In what ways? Oh, sorry, what's that?
Right. Now that I think about it, I bet the sailors were kind of like, why are we going this way? We're supposed to go the other way. But I guess when they found out that Portugal was behind their backs and he was running away from them instead of going to them and handing over his crew, I think they were like, oops, oops, Daisy, we challenged him when we shouldn't have.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they ever learned that part of it, that Portugal was coming after him. I- and this is something that will be beyond our reading, and it will be something that I'll summarize in sort of an overview next week, or maybe the supplemental content will talk about it. But so Magellan, spoiler alert, if you don't know how the story ends, close your ears for a second. They get around South America, they make it over to the Spice Islands in the Philippines, and after Magellan dies, uh, the Spanish are still trying to make it back home. They now have spices, but they run into Portuguese and they run into people who are out looking for Magellan's fleet. So Portuguese Portugal is still looking for Magellan. They're trying to make sure that if he finds something, whatever he finds belongs to Portugal, not Spain. Um, and so it is something that eventually they're like, oh wow, they were out looking for Magellan. They were in India. They were in the Spice Island, like Philippine area, looking for Magellan, still kind of keeping their eye out for his crew to come around just in case they actually made it. And so, I mean, a lot of these things come to light. I don't think that they ever found out, at least the sailors while they were on board, I don't think they found out that the Portuguese had sent a fleet after him, didn't find him, and then came back home. But I think uh, over the course of their whole voyage, eventually they start thinking, okay, yeah, I think Magellan had it right. Because after he dies, they go through like five captains because none of the five captains can maintain the ship. They can't maintain the crew. They try and be a little bit more lenient. They try and be more fun or cool. I don't know. Like they let them break rules, and then that causes so many issues. So then they have to replace that captain and get a new captain, and eventually, I mean, it's important to have rules. It's important to have rule followers, because then everybody knows what to expect. I think
Right.
so much in our society will say things like, especially like I don't know, I feel like sometimes society says that my church has some strict rules because I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do other
Yeah.
things that are normal for society, and
Yeah.
people look at that oftentimes and just say, oh, that's so hard, those are so strict, how can you do that? But I think having those rules gives me comfort and safety, right? And so I think having a leader like Magellan who is going to say, here's the line, don't you dare cross it, um, is I think for someone who's risking their life out on the sea, it's better to have people who are following the rules and sticking with the rules than just, hey, whatever I feel like doing, I'm gonna just do it and things will work out, right? So I think it's important to have rules and commandments and things um, to help keep us in line, to keep us going on the right path, especially when others are counting on us to do the right thing and make good choices.
Right. Also, I'm just wondering, I know that Magellan's ship, the Victoria, like you said when we went and visited replica, her replica, but
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, how did she and her crew get back to Spain if probably most of Portugal was looking for that one crew?
I'll tell you next week. It will be in our supplemental content for
There's a
next
lot of
week.
things you want to tell me next week.
I know, but this is one they eventually, so all spoilers, right? So they get to the Philippines, they have two ships left. One of those ships is not seaworthy enough to make it. So they start repairing it, and that ship is going to head back to Panama, where they're going to land on the west coast of Panama, take all the spices, trek them over to the other side of Panama, and then go back to Spain. That's the plan. The plan doesn't work out. They get to Japan, I think, and they start running into issues. They start having battles, and their ship is not going to make it. So they turn around and go back to the Philippines. The Victoria loads up. They run in, they evade some of the Portuguese, and they just take this southern route that goes really far south, further south than all the Portuguese are, and they go down around the Cape of Good Hope, and they barely make it home. Their ship, the Victoria, was in really, really rough shape. Uh, they didn't have enough men to really run it. They came home and they had 18 people left, and those 18 were not in good health. And so it's really just like this ghost ship that somehow made it back to Sevilla with the spices that they were carrying, and uh, just it's a crazy story. I mean, I don't know how it all worked out, how it happened exactly, like because with them looking for them, with the ship that if like they went a way that they weren't normal, that people didn't normally go, and if they ran into the wrong storm, if they went into a rock, like they're gone, and their ship couldn't have withstood anything really.
Right.
So it just is crazy.
Right. Quote George Washington, little short of a miracle, end quote.
Yeah, a little short of that. Uh, I don't know. I think it was totally a miracle. I think so many things that we've talked about in this course are miracles. I think the Age of Discovery was really a cool time. Um, the men weren't perfect, but they were definitely inspired, especially like Christopher Columbus, just how he had this like calling, right? Like he had this feeling that God was calling him to do it and giving him this inspiration and sort of revelation to go and do this. And he was going, I mean, he thought he was going to the Indies. He ended up hitting South America and the Caribbean islands, but I think his journey, the purpose of it was to find exactly what he found, even though that may not have been his motivation. But it's just crazy, like all of these things that just line up that it just worked out. Like, how on earth did all of these things happen? How did they make it? And I guess quoting Daniel, who was quoting George Washington, a little short of a miracle, I think is what you said, but totally miracles. So many miracles that happened. I think that God's hand was in a lot of this, helping them go where they needed to go. And so much of it was intuition, right? I mean, one of the things that I've looked into, if anyone has seen the path of the Strait of Magellan, which I'll share some of that this week because that's where he's going to get probably in the next chapter. But a lot of the sailing that they were doing was intuition, like what we talked about with Columbus when they were getting going back to Spain, how they everyone thought they were lost, and he felt like he knew where he was going, and eventually they found the Portuguese coast. Magellan has some of that stuff happening too, where it's just this intuition, and then suddenly they see a different type of tide and a different type of water, and it's where the Atlantic turns into the Pacific, and just sort of this realization that they have done it, they made it. It's crazy. Uh, it's definitely miracles, definitely inspiration. So I want to get to this real quick. According to my research, according to my research, there are approximately 270 men who sailed with Magellan at the beginning of the expedition. Only 18 on the Victoria made it back to Spain alive at the end of the voyage. So, I mean, that highlights the fact these people are really risking their life, right? To go out and do this, um, for whatever motivated them. Just a handful of cinnamon would have made, you know, the rest of their lives, they would have plenty of money just from that amount of spice. And so I think the risk that they are taking to go out and do this, a lot of courage, a lot of bravery, and maybe foolishness. I don't know. If if the odds were so far against you, then maybe joining Magellan's crew wasn't a great idea. I don't know. Um, and then one of the five original ships made it completely around the world, which was the Victoria. One ship was wrecked, and the others were deserted mostly because the crew was so small. I'll have a trivia question for you next week, but I want to ask you who the first person to circumnavigate the Earth was. Um, I'm just curious if you guys can find that trivia question. He's on Magellan's ship and he had a relationship with Magellan that's an interesting one. But I want to see next week, see if you guys can figure out who the first person was. Was it the captain that took over the Victoria? Who would be credited with the first person to make it all the way around the globe? And I'll throw in a caveat, not in the same journey, a few different journeys to make it around. That's the trick question for the week for next week. A few of my favorite things. What do you guys think? Chapters 1 through 5. What do you think of Magellan? What do you think of his story so far? What do you think of Portugal saying, you can't have our money, but if you go, we're coming after you? And their treatment of him. What do you guys think? David, go ahead.
So something I was thinking about, like through all the explorers, so like Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, and Magellan, was it reminds me of Shark Tank. Like, have you seen that show where like the
I love the
entrepreneur?
show. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that where like all these guys have to go like present their ideas to kings and try to get money, and then like go take that money and go like invest it into their business. And that's just something I was thinking about, and how
That's
there's like a
funny.
stock market.
Yeah. That's a fun thing to imagine. So you have like Ferdinand and Isabella in one chair. Whoever was king of Portugal at the time in another chair, and you have Columbus standing there. All right, sharks. I have I have a plan. I'm gonna go west to get east, and I want to have this title, and then start negotiating. All right, well, if you sell for me, I'll give you this much money, but you can't call yourself the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. No, that's a deal breaker. It's kind of funny, all the scenarios. I like that. That's funny. And I bet it did kind of go like that to an extent, right? Because you had to get in front of the king, you had to present your idea, and they had to give their blessing. And so there would be a lot of research, a lot of um, salesmanship, I think, involved in in convincing them to let you do it under their flag and with their money. And I mean, we've also learned too that there were a lot of private investors that were giving money to the king so that he could give money to Columbus and Magellan to pay for their voyages. And they would get a percentage of everything that came back. A certain percentage would go to the king, certain percentage would go to these private investors, and then a percentage would go to the person who found it and brought it back. So there is a big part of that. Like, what percentage are you going to get? What percentage is this person going to get? And at some point, they may have just said, all right, I'll give you this much money for 20% of everything you find. And if you don't take it, I'm out. And then they go to another shark and talk about it. That's a fun way to think about it. Anything else? Any other thoughts that stand out to you about Fernão de Magalhães? Braden, go ahead.
I mean, nobody really mentions this a lot, but it's kind of obvious. I think it's really funny how like he's still considered the first person to circumnavigate the world. Like, just if you ask somebody, they're gonna say that, even though he was like dead for it.
Yeah.
And also like, yeah, it's
Yeah, it
just
is.
kind of funny because he was dead, but it's still everybody like considers because it was his voyage.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you know. Now you are not one of those who think that, right? I think that there are a lot of things that maybe we had assumed or thought because of, I mean, just exactly that. Like, I thought Magellan was that. So I think it would be a very common thing for someone to think Magellan was the first one. No, it was his voyage. And without him, they wouldn't have made it. I think any other leader would not have gotten around. They wouldn't have found the Strait of Magellan. They wouldn't have gone and found a way to get past South America. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. He gets a lot of credit for that, for being the first one. So I'm curious, do you know the answer who the first person was to circumnavigate the Earth? We'll talk about it next week. And he doesn't make it back to He doesn't make it back to Sevilla on the Victoria. That
Magellan?
person.
I got a big one.
No. We'll see next week. See if you can get it. Christopher, go ahead.
I know the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, wasn't it? Sir Francis Drake, right?
Indeed. Yep.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about him on the last week of class. So he'll be the person of our focus for the last week, kind of round out the age of discovery. I want to tell you the answer. I'm going to let you see if you can figure it out. The first person to circumnavigate the Earth, and they didn't even make it back to Sevilla on the Victoria. Who was it? And the story is pretty interesting about why he didn't make it back on the Victoria. What happened that prevented him from doing that? And it wasn't him dying.
Did he quit?
Maybe not. It's events that happen almost immediately after Magellan's death. I'll just give you that. It'll be fun to see if you guys can come up with it. There's one person that made it all the way around that didn't. In fact, that's it. We'll see. I need to fact check myself too. I might be leading you down this path and it's completely wrong. But I'm pretty sure that I read it and that everything in the story checks out in my head. So, but as I'm saying this now, I have a little bit of panic, like, oh wait, what if it didn't actually happen the way that I think it did? So I might be rewriting history with this question. I apologize if I am. I will fact check myself too. All right. So for next week, we'll continue reading Over the Edge of the World for one more week. Read chapters 6 through 9, and then the second half of chapter 10, as I showed up here. Start reading on this page. In my book, it's 269. It could be 270 in your book. I think some print versions are off a page or two, maybe. And then if you're following along on Audible, it's in chapter 10, starting at 1512. Um, so just skip ahead to that, and it's sort of the leading up to how Magellan's life ends. And I'll be curious to talk about next week to see if you agree with his choices that led to that happening, and if it was something that should have been avoided or could have easily been avoided, and just see what your thoughts are. Supplemental content for next week will be more on Magellan, more on his voyage, finishing out that story, finishing out the circumnavigation of the globe. Um, Beyond chapter 10, I'll just summarize it for you next week. Um, Magellan dies, and I'll summarize it for next week. The following week, which will be the last homework week, so in 2 weeks we'll focus on Francis Drake for a week, Sir Francis Drake, and then we'll do sort of a review of everything that we've learned over the course of the semester, and that will be it. So thanks again. Thank you for the great discussions today, you guys. Thanks for bringing your A game all the time. I really enjoy coming to the class. It's something I look forward to. And I appreciate all of your efforts and all of the learning you're doing. It's a lot of fun. I'll stop sharing my screen. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you guys next time. Well, have a good one.